Hello everyone, and welcome to the Tome of Silver, the show where I randomly select a game from my collection, review it, and add it to an ever-growing ranking list. The year 2001 saw the release of the Gameboy Advance, the next evolution of Nintendo's handheld consoles. With this new console released, many developers were moving on from the Gameboy Advance's predecessor, the Gameboy Color, to create games that made better use of the new hardware. However, the Gameboy Color wasn't completely out of fresh titles, as in 2002 WayForward released Shantae, a platformer-metroidvania hybrid, to the Gameboy Color. Unfortunately, likely due to being released 1 year into the Gameboy Advance's lifecycle, Shantae was a financial flop, selling very few copies. Despite these low sales, Shantae received very positive reviews, and over time the game started to become something of a cult classic. Thankfully, Shantae was able to bounce back and create a number of new entries, becoming a series that I very much love today. But how about that first title? Is it still a good game when held up to today's standards? Prep some magic, dance to the groove, and let's turn the page to Shantae for the Gameboy Color. Shantae is a half-genie, having been living in Scuttletown, where she acts as the town's guardian. Suddenly, Scuttletown is attacked by Risky Boots, a greedy pirate seeking to get as much wealth and power that she can get her hands on. Shantae manages to put a stop to Risky's attack, but Risky manages to steal a valuable item from her uncle, Mimic, the steam engine. The steam engine has the power to take over all of Sequentland. However, in order to power the steam engine, Risky needs 4 elemental stones hidden all over Sequentland. Resolving to put a stop to Risky's evil scheme, Shantae sets out to find all 4 elemental stones before Risky does, and save the world. Shantae is a visually impressive game for the Game Boy Color. The environments and towns have a commendable amount of detail to them, bringing the world of Sequentland to life. Also, the sprite work that went into animating these characters is quite good, especially with Shantae's dancing. Shantae herself has a lot of personality and is instantly likable. Honestly, every character in Shantae is charming, thanks to the game's sharp writing. The game has a good sense of humor to it, making jokes and characters exchanging humorous banter with each other. The dialogue in Shantae makes every character worth talking to, and that's something I can't say about a whole lot of games. It's easy to see why the Shantae series would stick to this tone in future entries, as it adds quite a lot of charm and personality. Getting into the gameplay, the way Shantae works is that each of the 4 elemental stones are located in dungeons found throughout Sequentland. To get there, Shantae will need to move across the overworld through obstacles and enemies to find a town, which will have an NPC needed to open the gate to the dungeon. Each dungeon has some puzzles, a boss, and a genie who will teach Shantae a special dance, which will allow her to transform into an animal, each with their own unique abilities. With these transformations, Shantae can return to the overworld to access previously unreachable locations to find the next town, access the next dungeon, and so on and so forth. As you explore Sequentland, you can find hidden heart holders, which increase Shantae's total HP. Shantae herself can attack with her hair, which whips a short distance in front of her. She can also jump and sprint. Once you acquire the aforementioned special dances, Shantae will access multiple transformations. The monkey has a high jumping ability and can climb up walls. The elephant can smash through otherwise unbreakable obstacles. The spider can climb walls in the background. And the final transformation, the harpy, allows Shantae to fly indefinitely. Unfortunately, these transformations for the most part feel purely situational. With the exception of the elephant, none of these transformations are capable of attacking, and even in the case of the elephant, they move so slowly and are a fairly big target, so it's not recommended using the elephant outside of breaking blocks to progress. The harpy is very useful for navigating around, but since you get it in the final dungeon of the game, you're really only using it before the final boss and finding all the remaining collectibles. I do use the monkey for its extra speed and climbing ability to have a slightly easier time navigating the overworld, but other than that, I almost never touch these transformations unless they were completely necessary to progress. Shantae's dances are a fun way of going about upgrades. Shantae being a dancer herself, having dances be how you transform is unique, and it gives that game a little extra personality. That being said, I found the way you perform these dances really killed the flow of gameplay. The way the dances work is you have to press a sequence of buttons in a rhythm to successfully perform a transformation. What this means is needing to continuously stop in place to perform them. There were even a few instances where I needed to transform and progress, then revert back to Shantae in order to defend myself or make a jump, just to immediately have to transform back to the same animal. The novelty of dancing wears off after a while, and the process starts to become monotonous. Still, I won't be too hard on it, as I understand that it's a limitation of the game when it was released, so there really isn't too much that could have been done to change this around while keeping the dancing gimmick. Now, if you play Shantae on the Game Boy Advance, the game will be enhanced in certain ways. This including a much more vibrant color palette, as well as an exclusive transformation, the Tinkerbat transformation. The Tinkerbat can climb, attack, and jump really high, making it a great inclusion. If you're just playing on the original Game Boy Color though, you're unfortunately out of luck. Getting from town to town in Shantae feels more like a proper platformer. The path between each town is broken up into individual sections, each with enemies and some simple platforming. I found these individual sections to be fun and offered the right amount of challenge. The first time. The problem with Shantae is that after going through an area the first time, needing to go back through them is significantly less fun. As Shantae is also a Metroidvania style game, Shantae has a lot of backtracking. Whether it's needing to return to a previous town in order to use a new transformation dance, or searching the area to find a health holder, you'll need to go back and forth through the same areas quite a bit, and as you repeat these areas, a lot of cracks begin to show. First, refighting enemies is rarely worth it, as over time the enemies will eventually get enough pot shots in to drain your health and cause you to lose lives that are better served being saved for the game's dungeons. Second, the sections that make up each area go on for a long time, each one taking upwards to 4 minutes or so to navigate if you're going through it normally and trying to avoid enemy attacks. However, losing a life will send you to the very beginning of the section, meaning if you died right near the end of an area, you'll need to do the whole thing over again with one less life. It's a tedious process. Now, the game does have an item shop, where you can buy a number of useful tools that can help you navigate through these sections. These can include magic attacks, like a fire projectile to deal lots of damage to an enemy, some potions to regain health, and most importantly, vanishing creams, which makes you invisible and intangible to enemies for a period of time. I pretty much only used the vanishing creams over damage dealing magic, as running through each section was both faster and cheaper than needing to buy multiple magic attacks to defeat the amount of enemies that can be thrown the player's way. The game gives the player the tools necessary to return to old areas with minimal issues, but to do that you'll need to pay for it, and that means grinding for money. To farm for gems, Shantae's currency, the player can either defeat the same enemies over and over again while picking up the gems they drop, or playing some of the mini-games that can be found in various towns. The minigames are definitely the faster and more entertaining way to get gems, but even still, the amount of items you'll need to comfortably backtrack through each area will cause you to need to replay these minigames quite a bit, and they start to get repetitive nevertheless. Another unfortunately annoying aspect to Shantae is that the game has a day and night cycle. On one hand, a day and night cycle is impressive, especially since there are no pauses or delays when it switches the time of day. It's completely instantaneous. However, outside of visual changes, two elements are affected by the day-night cycle. First, when it's night, enemies will get stronger, being able to both take more hits and dish out harder hitting attacks themselves. Secondly, there are these special collectibles that only appear at night, fireflies. Finding them all will earn Shantae a unique healing dance. Furthermore, certain mini-games can only be accessed at certain times of day. Here's my problem with this. First of all, these collectibles and minigames only being accessed at certain times means that if you want to do, say, the dancing minigame in Scuttletown or go hunting for fireflies, and it's daytime, you just need to stand still and wait until it changes to nighttime before you can get on with what you want to do. Second, because enemies get stronger, it only makes running back and forth between towns even more frustrating. Why would I ever want to try and make my way through a section at night when all it offers is a tougher time? Instead, I'm forced to just stand in the same spot until it becomes daytime again, before I want to continue. This day and night cycle offers nothing fun outside of a change in visuals, and instead forces so much waiting and tedium that it's better off just not being included. I know with how I've been describing Shantae thus far, it seems like I absolutely hate the game, but honestly that's not the case. There are definitely things to like about Shantae, champion among them being the game's dungeons. They have some nice aesthetics to them, and the dungeons have some pretty fun puzzles to complete as you navigate the various rooms and hallways. The puzzles were nothing that had me scratching my head or anything, but every dungeon had something to it which kept me entertained. I especially liked the second dungeon, which had a neat color swapping mechanic. Depending on what color you are, certain enemies will attack you or get stunned by you. So with proper use of color switching, getting through these sections can be harder or easier. The bosses themselves were also very fun, usually making use of whatever transformation you just obtained. Another thing I appreciated was enemies defeated in a dungeon will remain defeated unless you exit the dungeon entirely. This gives proper incentive to fighting enemies other than them just dropping gems, and removes the frustration of needing to re-defeat enemies every time you come back to a room. Overall, the dungeons in Shantae were all really good, easily my favorite aspect of the game. It's also in these dungeons that you can find warp squids. By giving forward to the mama squid in each town's warp squid hut, you can learn a dance that will allow you to instantly warp back to whichever town you place the squids. This does remove backtracking, which is great. However, you will of course need to make sure you actually find the warp squids in each dungeon in order to do so. I would have preferred you just gain the ability to return to a town after you first reach it or after clearing that area's dungeon, but at least this option is there. And something that is appreciated is that you aren't limited to giving the squids found in, say, the water dungeon to the mama squid in Watertown. For example, let's say I found 3 squids in the water dungeon, and later found 1 squid in the oasis dungeon, bringing my total squids up to 4. I could then use the 3 squids from the water dungeon alongside the 1 from the oasis dungeon to get the dance to warp me to Oasis Town. It lets you at least choose which town you would prefer to have as your warp location if you aren't finding each and every squid along the way. And if you are finding them all, hey, you won't have any issues anyways. Shantae sits in a strange spot in terms of its gameplay. At its core, it's a Metroidvania. You get new abilities to access new areas while searching the world to get upgrades for Shantae. We see this style of gameplay further with its approach to dungeons and their layout. However, during the segments on its overworld, it can start to feel like a platformer. Shantae has lives, and the world has bottomless pits and insta-kill spikes, all things which are uncommon in Metroidvania-style games. Shantae likely did this to give it its own unique identity in the gameplay department, which is all well and good, but the elements it chooses to mix just don't go well together. What's the point of upgrading my health when I can immediately lose all my lives upon falling into a pit or touching spikes, you know? These two gameplay styles didn't mesh particularly well, and the game probably would have been better off just having the enemies be the obstacles instead of having such a heavy emphasis on platforming. Lastly, I did notice some sprite flickering as I played, and a bug near the end of the game that turned sections of dialogue into complete gibberish. Now, I should note that for the sake of recording, I was playing the Switch re-release of Shantae by Limited Run Games. As I was not playing the original Gameboy Color cartridge, I cannot say for certain if these errors were always part of the game or simply an issue with the re-release. None of these errors are particularly significant, and hardly took away from the experience as a whole. However, it is worth noting. As the first game, Shantae is a clear case of the developers trying out new ideas and trying to figure things out. I respect the attempts that they made, it's just unfortunate that not all of them worked out in a way that's fun to play. And I should note, I have been especially critical of this game, I understand that, but I do want to make it clear that despite the amount of complaints I have, none of the complaints are particularly awful or ruin the game. It's a case of death by 1,000 cuts, where it's just all these little issues that add up to make the game not age as gracefully as it otherwise could have. There is fun to be had here, make no mistake. The world and characters of Shantae are infinitely charming, and the dungeons are legitimately great, and something I actively looked forward to as I progressed. It's for that reason it's such a shame that the game has so many stumbles that it does, making it a game I struggle to recommend, especially since there are other, better Shantae games that can be played instead. With all that in mind, Shantae will take the number 15 spot in the ranking. There are things to like about Shantae, however I can't really see myself wanting to return to this game in the foreseeable future. When it becomes a slog, the game can become tiring to play despite its short runtime. Future Shantae games will no doubt fare better, but the first entry just didn't age as gracefully to make its way up higher on the list. Next time, we'll be returning to where these ranking videos all began, with the Aliens franchise. However, it seems like the Xenomorphs aren't going to be the only extraterrestrial threat awaiting for us. In the meanwhile, thank you so much for watching. Take care, and may we see each other again when we turn to the next chapter in the Tome of Silver.